Let's break down a relatively universal truth. Most of us, respectable humans, have the goal of navigating life in a way that we can maintain balance, happiness, and success, right? All while having stable mental health and giving back to our community. Okay, if we can agree on that much, then you should keep listening. We spoke to Gen Z. In this episode, Lauren, Neelesh, and Lola. Lauren is 20 and came in hot by telling us about the cyber attacks and bank collapses she faces on her phone from the moment she wakes up. Oh, and somehow NATO's involved in there too. Scary. But real talk, she literally faces these end-of-the-world threats from the minute she wakes up and all through her day. So how should she navigate these inevitable world-ending crises in the future? We'll find out. Neelesh describes happiness and success as having financial security and the freedom to do what he wants. Become a millionaire. Just kidding. He just doesn't want to stress about money. Oh, and he's 16. Legend. Lola, who's 22, tackled the tough talks of exploring whether Gen Z is lazy or not. And she also shared the necessity of feeling all the feels and how important that is. Becky Henderson, our special guest on this first episode, helps us break down the role of mental health and major life decisions through unprecedented times of financial crisis and pandemic. Oh, and the choices of where to go to college and what to do when we grow up and where we're going to live and when to buy a house. Kidding. But for real, Becky drops her knowledge about being mindful on how to be effective in the world, rather than going through life letting the world affect you. The one that starts with an A, affect. We also get into other topics this episode, like the danger of avoiding discomfort and the significance of purpose for humanity. Dr. Leon Vanstone and myself, Natalie Payton, chime in with our millennial perspectives, and Dan Dillard, our facilitator, shares how his past careers, as well as his experience with fatherhood of a Gen Zer, has shaped all he does today in business and parenting. Let us know if you learned something new this episode, or have topics you want to discuss. You can find us on the socials, and follow us wherever you're listening now. Check us out at our home on the web at foundingup.com. And if you're a Gen Z person or someone who's lived more life than a Gen Z person and think you could contribute to the show as a mentor, you can sign up on our site. We've had a great time exploring the challenges Gen Z faces and offering solutions and hope to better navigate your futures. So please consider being a guest on the podcast. And of course, stay tuned to hear more.
Welcome to Uncharted, your sidekick for life. I'm so excited to get started with this. It's a new concept. We'll have a correspondent, Anaïs, that has gone out and had some questions of Gen Z and what they're facing. And we have mentors in studio to talk about possible solutions. Let's get started with some introductions. Why don't we start over here, Natalie?
Hi, I'm Natalie Payton. I'm an actor, comedian, and podcast personality.
I like it. Leon?
Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Leon Vanstone. I am co-founder at Founding Up. I am a rocket scientist, a storyteller, and an entrepreneur.
And I'm Dan Dillard, a media producer, podcast producer, and also co-founder of Founding Up. So excited about this project. And our guest mentor today is Becky Henderson. Becky, you want to talk a little bit about your background?
I do want to talk a little bit about my background. Hello, I am Becky Henderson, and I am a coach for founders, business owners, small business owners, entrepreneurs, and essentially my work is to help my clients create more than enough of what matters to them. And so, a little bit about my background: I am professionally trained in counseling. So here in the state of Texas, I am a licensed professional counselor, and I maintain that licensing. And yet, in terms of service, I am offering coaching services. I'm not actually doing therapy, but I stay very much in the loop of what is happening with mental health
Mhm.
and what are the laws and requirements around serving people that have any kind of challenges, mental, emotional types of issues that they might seek out therapy for. So, in addition to that, then what I do as a coach is I am the president and founder of the Plenteous Life, which is a system of personal and professional development tools, coaching, resources that we then use to help our clients create more of what they want.
Sounds like she knows a little bit about what she's talking about.
A little bit.
I actually have firsthand experience. Becky and I have worked together for what, 6 years?
7. We're
7
going on
years?
7 years. Yeah.
And it's just been a life-changing experience. So I wanted Becky on our first podcast as part of the process here is to kind of listen to what is happening with Generation Z as far as what challenges are being faced and be able to address those. So how this is going to work is we'll play some clips of some of the course one of our correspondents, Anaïs, has gone out there and talked to a few folks, and we'll answer those questions. Let's start with the first one.
What worries you about what you see in the future for yourself?
I go on social media and it's like, oh, our phone service, my phone service was off to this when I woke up, and I woke up and I was on and I have Wi-Fi, so I didn't really notice it, but I woke up on TikTok and everybody's like, oh, we're suffering from a cyber attack, AT&T's all off, like blah blah. And I'm like, I just woke up. Like I just woke up, and I'm like I'm watching social media just be like, oh, we're having a cyber attack. Oh, like NATO's coming. There's gonna be I literally within the last hour that I was watching TikTok, it's cyber attack. NATO's not gonna something about NATO. Like NATO's talking about
Okay.
war, and then there's like, oh, the U.S. banks might collapse, and we're gonna have a crash, and blah blah blah. And I'm like, I just woke up, okay? I just woke up, and I'm like, I'm trying to. It's not a good time, especially if I just broke up with somebody. I just like I'm going through all this stuff, and then I wake up and see that. I'm like, okay, well now I have no hope. Now I have like, okay, what am I supposed to do about all this? And it's like, and then it's like, oh, I see all these. When I go work at service industry jobs, some of these people have degrees and they're in the same industry as me, and it's like, okay, so why am I going to spend upwards of $100,000 on a degree if I'm going to end up making the same amount of money when I didn't have that degree?
Yeah.
So a lot of content to share there. That was the question is what we saw there is what worries Gen Z about the future. We have one comment there, and I'd like to get started with some of the panelists before we get to your answer, Becky. So Natalie or Leon, if you got any comments about what was said there, like what your
I
thoughts are.
can definitely relate to her about the banks crashing, and that's why I buy Bitcoin. It's something that I definitely think about. And the cyber attacks, I think that social media has so much misinformation, and I call it going where the buses don't run.
Mhm.
Like all the stuff that's, for example, earlier today I saw that the eclipse coming up on the 8th is it's just two satellites making. I mean, of course that's ridiculous, but there's so many conspiracy theories, and I think that is definitely something to worry about, being infiltrated in our minds with all of the misinformation out there on both sides.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. Just on both sides of the spectrum. So that's definitely worrying. And I think it causes young minds to overthink and stress and try to figure it out. So I can
Yeah,
relate.
it's really interesting when you actually think about it, because I think generations having to think about, our kids and grandkids and how every generation faces society different. There's new technologies. There's just so much, and it's really easy to excuse something off or say, "Oh, they just don't want to do this." And you hear this on social, and you hear it every place uh, uh, in the news and things of that nature, where there's judgments against classes of generations, and it's just our kids and grandkids is what they are. But we have to look at the bigger picture. What are they seeing, or what are they facing? What do they have that we didn't? And that's what the show's all about, is just kind of trying to have that empathy and putting ourselves in those shoes, and how would we answer that. I know, Leon, that you sent me an article not too long ago about the phones and kind of getting off the phones. I think it was a couple days ago. I don't know if you have any comments on what you saw there, or how that applies to this.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, right? The TVs were invented, and suddenly the news stories were all about children being snatched, stolen off the streets,
Right.
and parents stopped letting their kids play outside. Right? That was what they said about millennials. We were too soft. We didn't go outside enough. And I'm a millennial for context, right? And so, and Jaws, an old movie for Gen Z, but was about a shark attack, and suddenly everyone was afraid of sharks. There are like 4 people that die each year to shark attacks, and that includes Australia, which is the most lethal country in the world, right? So, the point being is that people are afraid of the things they hear about. Because, when we were all cavemen, if your friend got eaten by a tiger or something, a lion, that was a good thing to be afraid of, right? If something immediately happened to your one tribe, that was something to worry about. And that's how we're wired up. That's the way I think of it. And so when every day the world ends not once, not twice, not 10 times. Like it's a cyber attack and NATO something, and conspiracy theories left, right, and center. And especially when you're young, I think, and you've less of that generational wisdom to be like, okay, yes, it's the end of the world yet again, today, tomorrow, the day after, next week, next month. It's the only constant. And I think that's something we missed. We didn't really know. We gave phones to our kids, and actually, it was one of the largest experiments we did as a society on children. Is what happens when you are always connected to this thing that is designed to suck you in. Turns out the most viral things are anger and fear, and so it's almost like you invented gambling and then gave that as a toy to kids. These phones are designed to make money off of people from watching things. And we handed that all to our kids, the most impressionable people we had. And strangely enough, being constantly told the world is ending and things are fearful and made angry gives you anxiety and depression.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's what happens. And we did that. We are their parents. It's not their fault. It's our
Right.
fault, in my opinion. But
Right. Well, a couple of things I noticed on there as well, before we get to your comment, Becky, is, she mentioned some of the things that she was going through. She was going through a breakup. She was going through, she was working and she was working in the service industry, and working next to someone that got a degree. And so she's having this decision of what kind of education do I need to get? Do I need to go spend $100,000 if I'm going to end up like this person next to me? I mean, she's jumping some pretty good conclusions. And those are some of the representation of some of the weight on the shoulder, because college prices, I don't know if you know this, and those that don't, I one of the things I've done in my life, because I'm much older, I'm generation, I even
I don't
forget.
even know, mate. Generation old.
Exactly. Generation old.
Uh-huh.
But one of the things I've done is financial advisor for over 20 years. And so I got to meet and talk to hundreds and hundreds of parents. And one of the things that caught my eye back in 2000 was that college inflation was growing by 8%. Regular inflation grows by 3. So if you got this thing that's part of everybody's budget, if they've got kids and want to send them to college, and that's growing by much larger than what your paycheck is growing by, at some point in the future, the math isn't going to work out. It's just not going you're not going to be able to handle the stress of that expense. And I think what we're seeing now is that tipping point, because now college does cost $100,000, $200,000. And another fact I'll throw out is college debt, because society as a whole puts this pressure on the generation. You got to go get education because you want the best for them. And we think that's the best for them. And when they don't have the funds to pay for it, guess what? Uncle Sam says you can do it, and you can go borrow $100,000 at 18.
Zero credit.
Zero credit, right? That's a tremendous amount of weight. So the number at the current moment is $1.7 trillion of college debt. It's an enormous thing. To put that into perspective, it is second only to housing. So we're strapping a housing bill. Oh, let me finish that piece. Second only to housing, and it will overtake housing in 2042 as the biggest debt expense in our nation, because it's still growing at 8% and housing isn't. And so what we're saying here is, here, 18-year-old, here's a house bill, but you have no house. This is what it costs to get that education. So there's a lot of pressure there. So I'm hearing that in the video. I'm hearing going through, the relationship issues. And then I'm hearing so those are her real problems. And then all the other problems that you talked about,
right?
The world's problems, she's also adding those to herself. And then what does she say in the video? It's like, no hope. And that's what we're trying to address with this show, is that there is hope. Mentorship and talking to the right people, giving you the right direction. And that's what Leon and I are working on behind the scenes on Founding Up. And we're excited to talk about that in the future. But that there is hope, and that's the message that we want to say is we're listening, we're looking for the answers, and we're going to get them back. So one of the answers that we want to talk to you about was your thought. You heard the people that have some experience with this, but I want to hear your thought.
Yeah, so a lot of great dialogue based off of Lauren's concerns about the future. The thing that really stood out to me is that concerns about the future in general are a function of two two views. It's my view of the world, so my worldview, in the context of the view that I have of myself. So my self view and where those two overlap. Because if when I answer the question regarding my worldview, is the world fundamentally friendly or hostile place to live? Now, I'm not saying it's all one or the other, but if I have to lean in one direction, is it more friendly than hostile, or is it more hostile than friendly? Or another way to ask that is life essentially for me, or is life against me? So all of this is the world. And then how do I see myself in terms of my capacities, my strengths, what I am gifted and created to do? Essentially, do I see myself as being capable to create what is needed when it's needed down the road? Or do I see myself as a victim of situation and circumstance? In essence, in practicality, oh, I can't have a successful life because this is the background that I come from, or the opportunity that I didn't get to have, and so we place all these limits on ourselves. But essentially, am I willing to take full ownership and responsibility over my life, regardless of my circumstances? Or am I going to live a life where I am limited and restricted by my circumstances? So being a victim of that. So do I see myself as someone who is happening to life and is making an impact and is making a difference in my day to day? Or is it the opposite? Am I being more influenced and more impacted
Yeah.
by the circumstances that I find myself in? And answering those two questions, what's my fundamental worldview and what's my fundamental view of myself, that is what is going to create how I conceptualize the future, how I speak of the future. And if I was working with someone who had a lot of worry and concern, a lot of anger, just based off of what they're filling their minds with all the social media and the news and whatever it might be getting, the echo chambers they might find themselves in, uh, then then the thing that I would ask them or say to them is, do you want to have a life where you are continually trying to predict the future and micromanage and anticipate the future? Or do you want to have a life where you are so confident in yourself that whatever happens in these extenuating circumstances quite literally doesn't matter in terms of how it's up to you? Is it up to you? Is it up to me in how my life is going to turn out? Or is it primarily going to be left up to these other forces outside of me?
So in a nutshell, for what I'm hearing, and just for Lauren's question, you're pretty much saying, hey, look, there's these extenuating circumstances and the world is happening and there's nothing you can do about that. It really doesn't impact you. You are impacted by a couple of choices now, which is college and, relationship and what she decides to do there. But reducing the noise, if she wants to live a life that is not being impacted, she can choose to do so. But that's something that obviously isn't taught everywhere, right? Until 7 years ago, until we started working together, I had some similar, world views about what was going on, and until I started learning that the power of self uh, to change things, then it made a difference. So the hope here is that this knowledge is shared, and others can look at that and say, "Oh, that makes a lot of sense." And so, really like that. I really like that perspective.
Well, I'll share real quick, very quickly. One of my favorite quotes by Abraham Lincoln
Mhm.
is that the best way to predict the future is to create it.
I love it. I love that. That's really good. All right, let's move on to our next clip, and this is Neelesh.
I felt like I was studying for my parents more than I did for myself, right?
Yeah.
And now in high
Yeah.
school, everything you learn, you kind of see how that could be applied to your future jobs, your future life. And so now you're kind of learning for yourself rather than learning because your parents want you to. So I think what you mentioned when you said that you felt more freedom and you felt that the only person who had the repercussions in college was you. I feel like when you think about how that's going to benefit you and when you're learning for yourself and not for someone else, that actually motivates you to learn a lot more.
That's a loaded question because we all have to answer that, right? What makes us happy? And it was interesting to see his perspective. Natalie, you got any comments?
By the way, he's a 16-year-old.
Right.
So I think that that's remarkable that he already has such a grounded worldview of him, or self-view, I should say, that he knows, I don't need to be a millionaire, billionaire. I don't need to try to achieve something that's maybe unattainable. I don't want to crush any dreams, but you have to work really hard to get there. But I want balance. He wants balance and contentment is what I'm hearing from him. And he thinks success is having the freedom to do what you want to do. And I am a huge proponent of that because I do believe in fractional working, and I do believe in entrepreneurship, and I do believe in going after what you want and trying to achieve the dreams that you want, even if it's going to be hard. My dad always says, if it was easy, everybody would do it, you know? And that's why I wake up every day to learn. And so to be able to learn even from a 16-year-old is really special.
Yeah. Thoughts, Leon, on happiness?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big question, but I do think from the perspective of Gen Z, they're in this really unique position that maybe the first generation where they can be and do anything.
Mm-hmm.
Very few Gen Z are expected to go get a job as soon as they can to support their siblings, which it's a good thing, right? But the problem is, when your community when you can't find purpose through helping your community, immediate or broader, where the world's like, yeah, you can join the workforce if you want, but it doesn't really matter, or take 4 years out again, it's fine, right? What do you do? That's actually really hard. They're the first generation ever, whereas in the Western world, we turn around and said, figure out what makes you happy and come back and let me know. Here's $100,000. Don't misspend it. Hope that doesn't go wrong for you. You only get one chance. No pressure, no pressure, no pressure. And
Say that again 10 times.
yeah, right. 10 times fast. Right. And I when I picked what I wanted to do for university, it was so dumb. It was untrue. I walked into this hall to talk to some careers guy. I didn't go to a very good school, but there was a careers guy there, and this old guy in the back of the hall looked really bored. And I think 3 people spoke to him all night, and I was one of them. And I said, where should I go to university? And he said, well, you could go here. And I said, okay. That was it. Right? No social media, no best of guides, no 100,000 different people's opinions. But it's like on Netflix, man. If there's only one movie, I guess I'm watching that.
And I want to clarify, when you say you didn't go to a good school, you ended up going to a good school.
Oh no, I'm like, when I was a teenager, I grew up in England. It's a whole different game. But yeah, right. So it wasn't like the school was really coaching me through this process, right? They just talk to this guy, I guess, whatever, it's up to you. And I was lucky they brought the guy, so that was nice. But this guy's like, yeah, go here. And I just said, okay.
There's also the problem of having too many decisions causing paralysis.
Yeah.
Right.
Like what you said with, I will look at Netflix and be like, can't choose. Don't know. Guess I won't watch TV.
Paralysis by analysis.
Yeah.
is the saying.
Well, if they make one mistake, that's their whole life ruined now, apparently.
How quick is it to go get back in the day, 20, 30 years ago, to go get a loaf of bread at the store? I'm going to this aisle that's about this big. I get 3 or 4 choices. Boom, done. I'm out the door in 5 minutes. You send me to get bread today, it's a whole aisle.
It takes me half an hour.
And I'm reading labels.
Groceries.
I'm doing all these things.
I suffer from this.
Yeah. So it is the amount of choices. Before we move on, I did want you to give a little bit of background on your work as a rocket scientist as it relates to, because you're like, Gen Z thinks this, Gen Z thinks that, but there's some experience of why you can say that.
Yeah, so I started a rocket lab at the University of Texas at Austin, and it was very different to most academic labs. I was a researcher there, and what I noticed was, UT especially sold itself on come to UT, be a rocket scientist. But there was no rocket science 101. There was no real tangible, repeatable roadmap. Like some people pulled it off, but that honestly was more by, it's like, yeah, you can go do this great thing. You go be a billionaire, but you're basically just aspiring to win the lottery at that point, right? It's like
Right.
wanting to be famous. You might as well just say, well, I'm going to win the lottery. Like, you can
No
try.
blueprint.
Hope it works out. And so I sat down and built this lab for the sole purpose of saying, how do I take a fresher and dependably turn them into rocket scientists? And so we took that lab grew from nothing, just me basically, to 250 students going through it every year in about 18 months. I think now it's about 350. And so I spent an incredible amount of time working with these students, helping them figure things out. How do you get an 18-year-old can hot fire a rocket? It's not actually beyond them at all. They're some of the smarter. Gen Z is, I was intimidated when I heard what they were doing at 18 and I saw their CVs. I was like, man, I wasn't doing any of this.
Right.
Like, there's no way I would have gotten into the schools I got into if you put me back through. If you put my CV next to them now, there's like no way you'd choose me, not in a million years. And so, people say Gen Z are lazy or Gen Z are this or that. And I'm like, man, these are some of the most well thought through, like brilliant,
Grounded.
yeah, similarly most experienced and grounded kids I've ever met. And so, I when I hear people say things like Gen Z are lazy, I'm like, that's absolute rubbish. They're not at all. They have been thinking about a side hustle since they were 14, 12, whatever it is, right? Where I was just like playing video games and Legos. These kids are like, oh, I need to be Insta famous and I can be monetized. Like, I didn't do any of that, man. I wasn't picking up crazy internships. So I don't know. So yeah, I had a lot of experience working with Gen Z, and I'm really grateful for it because it gave me a broader, better perspective. It taught me things. They taught me.
Right. Awesome. What I liked about your experiences, they also mentored each other as you gave them a problem and they were able to like figure things out, and it was just a really
and they were happy to share. Older generations sometimes would silo knowledge. One guy knows something he doesn't want the other people to know it, because then you can fire him, right? And the Gen Z shared everything without a second thought, and they really are some of the best kids I'd ever.
And there are some lovely, lovely qualities. Okay. Becky, what are your thoughts on happiness?
So my thoughts on happiness. First one is that no situation or purpose can ever make you happy. It just doesn't happen that way.
Okay.
So as long as a situation or a person has to be a particular way in order for me to be happy, then it really is a scenario where I won't be happy until. So until certain conditions are met, until I've got the job of my dreams, or until I have the relationship of my dreams. And I am looking to those scenarios, to those situations to bring happiness to me. And at best, all that can do is for a little while, like scratch the itch temporarily. And then the goalpost for happiness moves once again. And in my work, in the world of psychology, we call this always striving, never arriving. And
Makes sense, yeah.
It's the rat race. It's the next promotion, the next relationship, the next vacation, then. And the truth is,
there's no gold at the end of the rainbow.
it never, right. And the truth is, you are the gold, and you're wasting it chasing rainbows. And so what is really transformative is seeing that happiness is something that can be chosen and cultivated, like you would choose a seed and plant it in the ground and then nurture it, give it the environment where that thing can grow and flourish. And happiness or success or any state of being really can be that for us. And so that it becomes something that we embody, and that we then express, we bring and express our happiness in our relationships, in our work. And what ends up happening is that there is a multiplication factor. If I'm already happy, it's going to inform my decisions where I'll be much more likely to select a partner or choose a job or a career path that is reflective of that happiness that I've already got. And here's what's so important. When my happiness is independent of my circumstances, again, I don't have to try to predict what's going to come.
Right.
And I can actually live from real peace of mind that I really am okay right now. And I will continue to be okay in all of the successive and next right nows that I live out. And so a phrase that I learned early on in my coaching work was that happiness is not a place to get to, it's a place to come from.
Oh, wow. That's a really neat phrase.
And we can use it with any state of being, whether it's love or joy. It's a place to come from.
That reminds me of a couple things. One, it reminds me of, the saying, or not saying, but you read stories of like these gold medal winners, right? That they work for 4 years for this Olympic event, and then they go and they win the gold, and the next day they're depressed, right? So it's like, and those are like real stories, is because they've not come from a place of happiness, and so you can actually choose in your mind. Everything goes up here in your head. You choose in your mind to be a certain way and view life that certain way. And then, so I love that. I think that's a very, very, very powerful message. The second thing it reminds me of was I was having dinner with my daughter last night, and she's 20, Gen Z. And she was talking to me about all these plans that she's got for next year and the year after and all these things. And I said to her, I'm just here to give you the cheat codes because I've been through all this before. And I'll tell you that in my 50 years of life, me predicting the future is about 90% wrong. I mean, it shows up. I'm thinking it's going to do this, and it does this. And so I've noticed over time that I just don't predict. I plan and I go with something, but I'm not attached to that for the happiness. I'm just happy every day. And my advice to her was just live in the moment, live in the present, be happy in the present, and then things will unfold. But it just reminded me of that conversation because it's so true. We don't have, there's a lot of things that we don't have control over, but we do have control over happiness.
Yeah, and then specifically when we put that together with what are we filling our minds and our souls with? Where do we focus our attention? If we're going to be radically responsible for how our lives turn out, to be able to see, look, there are choices that I'm making from, the moment I wake up, even choices that I make before I go to bed at night, that impact my quality of sleep.
Happier the day before.
Well, yeah, and then what do I do? What are my choices as soon as I wake up? Do I turn on the propaganda box again and just start shoveling it in, or do I take time to exercise, meditate, pray, whatever these practices are that help to ground me and increase a sense of well-being? Well, like when Lauren's video, I just woke up. Well, right there, there's a choice. What do I do when I just wake up?
Right.
What do I do next?
Right.
And there I can have a tremendous impact on the quality of my life.
Oh, yeah. I just wanted to share that I started a practice of not looking at my phone until like 30 minutes after being awake, because the minute...
Just 30 minutes.
Yeah, and that's all it is. But oh my gosh, the amount of stuff I'm bombarded with, whether it's a news alert or how are you feeling right now, or text messages, or have you sent this email? So much stuff, and I'll just get overwhelmed. So now that first 30 minutes is for my defrosting time. That's what I call it. When you wake up.
Defrosting time.
I just always feel bullied by Duolingo. It's like, Leon, you haven't done your lesson yet.
Exactly. Lo siento.
Yeah, no, I love that. Let's move on to our next video. And this is Lola with a different perspective. She's background on Lola, she's worked in her dad's business for a while, so she found purpose early. So she's got a lot of different answers. But let's look at this.
It's my belief, but I don't believe that Gen Z is lazy. I think that what is actually happening is that they're questioning things, like really questioning things, and depression is a reality, and for the first time we're actually talking about it. So people are actually allowing themselves to be depressed, which was something that my father couldn't do. I believe that's what we're maybe confusing for laziness. But what do you think about that?
I definitely agree. I mean, to say lazy, I do realize sounds incredibly like insensitive because people go through so much, but there is a point where you do have to kind of take the reins and get up and have accountability and go, okay, I know I feel like absolute crap today, but I do have to do something. But I mean, I really think that the behavior could come from, their circumstance or how they grew up or, their environment. And I never ever think it's, whoever it is their fault. And sometimes, it is definitely okay to not be okay. Feel your feels. I'm 100% for that. It's all about the mental health, like you said the other day. And I think that is a big part as to why people lack motivation, if you will, because internally they don't feel like themselves. They don't feel comfortable in their own skin. They don't feel like they're strong enough, they're smart enough, they're capable enough or whatever, when they can be, as if they just need to be encouraged more.
I
Nice
adore
perspective.
Lola.
Yeah.
I think she's so great. She's, I want to say 20 years old, but like you said, she found her vocation early through her dad's business, which also is a self-care, self-betterment business. And I would call it self-love business. I mean, with cryotherapy and massages and exercises, and she manages that and gets to see people coming in and improving every day, whether it's like through pain management or whatever the case may be. So this young woman is just being a voice for older people who are coming in to seek treatments at this facility, and she's just so grounded and so great.
Yeah. On our last question, you talked about those choices that some people have, that people, generations can sometimes say Gen Z is lazy, but you had comments on that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I think is really hard, really, really hard, especially if you're younger, right, is how do you affect the world? What choice are you going to make, especially when it can be any choice, but even if you are limited in some sense, what are you going to do in the world? The nice thing in some senses about being able to go into your dad's business or whatever it is, right, these opportunities that some people get afforded, is that kind of gets decided for you. And then you can get going, and you do get an impression for how you can be effective in the world. And once you understand that, man, making future choices does get a lot easier. These are the things I'm good at, and I'm going to roll with my strengths, right? Don't try to, there's this sort of Gen Z problem of, what if I make the wrong choice? What if I'm bad at it? Just find something you're good at and run with it. And then you'll figure, that's what we're all doing. It's just like, okay, I'll try. I'm good at this. I'll do more of it. Right. And so, I think that's really interesting, right? The person that's kind of got an opportunity earlier on to find out how they can change the world and affect the world is much happier in it, right? And that's the problem I see with a lot of Gen Z, I think, is they're in a world that seems like it's full of crisis, that's against them, and they have absolutely no tools to change that. So what is the right response psychologically to being stuck in a situation which is oppressive and that you have no idea how to change? It's anxiety. That's the proper response to that situation. Your brain's like, you have to figure this out. You have to do something, right? And there is nothing you can do. At least it feels like to them, right? I mean, there is. It's going to take you 5 years, right? And so in my mind, it's like people are like, there's a mental health crisis. It's not a mental health crisis at all. They feel exactly the way they should feel. It's when you get stuck in that kind of situation. Now, it's not a real situation. I'm not saying that's the truth of it, but that's how they feel about it. And that's the right way. And so, my thought there is, again, it's just really interesting. Here is someone who has an opportunity where they have been lucky enough that they could be shown that they can be really effective in the world. And Gen Z are probably the most effective generation that we've had, and so I just think that's really interesting. The person that, got to be able to experience that effectiveness earlier on had a very different sort of worldview as some of the earlier people we'd heard from. So
one of the things that I admire about my experiences with Gen Z and having a daughter, I'm living through these experiences for years now, is the ability to think about depression and think about, seek help early, think about self-care, think about take time off and unplug. And that's not something that my generation grew up with. It was always, 40 hours plus. You get up, no matter how you feel, you make it happen. You were more of a slave, if you will, to the system. And Gen Z saying, no, I want work this way. It needs to be flexible. I need to have my mental health days. I need to have this. And I think I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying that this step back and actually make that as a priority. There's something to that is admirable. What are your thoughts? Am I wrong or right about that? Or
Oh, I have thoughts. I have thoughts. Particularly, one of the things that I see as Gen Z's challenge is and I'm going to speak specifically to Western culture. So
Yeah, right.
I'm not speaking to any non-Western cultures because I assume it can be a very different scenario for them. But we have in our country a generation that was born into what I will call the safety context. It is a context where safety is prioritized and above all else. And what's interesting is there's this inverse relationship where safety becomes the highest priority, where that increases, freedom and aliveness decreases. And so there's this inverse, where there's a lot of risk, there's a lot of aliveness and thrill,
A lot
right?
of reward.
A lot of reward, right? But safety is low. There's not, because you're taking on so much risk. And so there's this inverse relationship. And this is my suspicion. I suspect that because my generation, our generation, created this overemphasis on safety and has deprioritized aliveness and risk, that we have a generation of people. It's not just Gen Z. I would say this is probably true for a lot of folks in the West, but we have lost our tolerance to discomfort and uncertainty. And so discomfort now triggers our brain that something's wrong here. And unfortunately, growth is dependent on discomfort. It's like the discomfort is a signal that you're growing, you're stretching, you're moving into uncharted territory. And so it's very uncertain. And so if you've got this conflict between a high need for safety and a low tolerance for uncertainty and risk, you are going to create a very disillusioned generation. And I would say that is maybe the impetus that has Generation Z asking the questions that they're asking and challenging the status quo, is this disillusionment that they're up against. When Lauren mentioned, there's no hope, it's because they're not seeing that there is something to be embraced in the uncertainty, in the chaos, in
The chaos is almost the point. That's opportunity comes out of the chaos.
Right. Exactly. And if they've been trained to avoid the chaos and avoid discomfort,
Right.
then there's going to be a lot of angst at a time in life that is just naturally filled
Right.
with a lot of angst and proclivities to the extreme. Like, there is nothing wrong with Gen Z being extreme about something.
Right.
Every generation has been extreme when they've been 15, 16, 19, 20 years old.
Right.
That is the
I
season
refer our listeners
of
to the
life.
60s. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I there's no fault at all in seeing what to my old eyes is, oh, that's an exaggeration. Oh, that's prone to drama. No, that's just the time of life, and it makes life exciting. We like thrill, we like excitement. So those are my thoughts.
I love that. Yeah.
And picking up on one piece quickly that I thought was really interesting there about, we have become as parents in society far less tolerant of risk on our kids, right? And again, kids stopped playing outside in the street or running around when they were on their own when they were 5 or 8 or whatever it was, right? Because you were afraid they were going to get snatched away. And then there's this ever increasing
we just look at the playgrounds that we used to grow up in versus ones today.
They're like torture devices back then, like spears and sharp things and metal and
monkey bars and gravel on the ground.
Two-story monkey bars.
They were really high compared to today's.
And I get it, right? I get it. If you want child mortality to come down, you have to keep making things safer. You do. Or you just say, and that's enough. That many dead children each year is fine. I'll put up with that, right? Those are the choices we make as societies.
It's not clipped up.
It's brutal, right? But it is, right? Either you make the playground safer, and no kid falls to their death, and now we all have
lead out.
Right, exactly. No more lead paint, right? But the flip side also is we have to then say, okay, we took the real risk out. So how do we put risk back in a tolerable way? How do I put my kid in uncomfortable situations?
Yeah, because I don't want their worlds to become so sterilized that there's no like organic learning or growth or getting a skinned knee. You know what I mean? Like that sounds boring to me. Like kids need to fall on their face and learn from that, I think. It is really hard to watch my niece and nephew be on the very high swing or jumping off, and I'm like, oh, okay.
Because we've experienced it. We know the pain, but
exactly.
And I think that was the thing with the phones as well, right? Right at the height of the internet with, Google and Facebook and all these, Silicon Valley was this shining beacon in the world, right? And the internet was this bastion with free speech, and it was going to destroy the remaining dictators and democracy would rule supreme, right? If you remember the Arab Spring, 2010, all that stuff. And so you're like, give the kid a phone. It's what could be better than being on the internet and having access to all this knowledge? And it's safe anyway. They just sit on the sofa. They don't even go outside. They're not going to get hurt. They're just going to be on their phones. How could that go wrong?
also keeps kids quiet.
It does keep them quiet. And then jump forward 15 years and you're like, oh no, what did we do?
Which goes back to the playground thing. Is my concern for kids is that they'll lose their imaginations.
Right.
And that's why I love the storytelling aspect, is retelling stories in an audio way so that they can actually imagine things again rather than screen time 24/7. That's a whole other conversation, but
well, and what ends up happening, the interesting thing about that part of the brain that is responsible for imagination is that depending on the focus of imagination, so that imagination could be, fantasies and fairy tales of conquering the world and becoming a hero or whatnot, or that same imagination can be used to think of all the terrible things that are going to happen.
Right.
One way or another. Like I love Steve Chandler. He says that worry is a terrible use of the imagination.
Wow, I like that.
Yeah,
But, just understanding that even that imagination is always in play. We're always utilizing it.
Yep.
But it's what is the fuel that we are feeding our imagination with? So it works both directions.
I love that. Great comments on that. All right, let's move on to our next one. We have another clip of, let's see. This is going to be Lauren.
How do you live that, working and studying and trying to figure out life altogether?
When I was in college still, so I'm doing real estate, but when I was in college still, I didn't work, but I did realize, because I graduated 2021, so that was right after COVID, and I was online my last year. Like I didn't go in person, and so for me going not in person into in person in college, I just didn't have the motivation, because when COVID happened, it was like all those people were let go because their roles weren't important. And then it was like, okay, so what roles are going to be important? Like what do I do when another thing like this happens?
That's interesting. That's a good perspective. I mean, it's a good question.
Mm-hmm.
Thoughts?
I'll come back to me.
All right, Leon?
Yeah, I mean, that is a tough one. And again, it comes back to a lot of the things we talked about, right? Like, some people will look at chaos and see opportunity.
Right.
And others people will look at chaos and see danger.
Yeah.
And, you know, I am old enough, thankfully, and I've lived long enough to be like, you know, we went through the '08 crash. I remember this. I just like her, I finished uni just in time for the entire economy, for the first once in a lifetime economy crash, right? And everything was hopeless and all these people were getting fired. And it did feel like that. I can really relate. And I just thought, well, what am I going to do? And I thought, well, I'll just get a job. Okay, worst case, I could probably work in I was living in London at the time. I'll work in a cocktail bar. That would be quite good fun, I thought. And I muddled through, and the first job was terrible. I quit out of that in about 11 months. But I just got one. I don't know. I was just, what else was there to do? But again, there was this feeling for me that was like I needed to go get a job because I needed to be earning money because my parents weren't going to be able to support me. And so it was that or not eat. And those of you watching this podcast on the cameras will see I like eating. So
Please, you got it sorted.
yeah, right. So I don't know. I just went and did something, and most things just work out.
Right.
You know, I read this wonderful quote. It said, if you start with a perfect solution, right, to go to attack a problem with, you always end up finding out that it was never the perfect solution, and it took you way longer to get there anyway. So the optimal solution, the best solution to any problem, is always wrong. Because you should just start with something, and it'll be wrong, and that's fine. You're always going to be wrong anyway. Nothing's ever perfect, right? And then just go with it and then refine it. And so I don't know. What she's saying resonates with me. But the answer is, you know, go get a job. You'll figure it out. So,
Yeah. Two thoughts. One, that reminded me of a joke.
let's hear it.
Yeah, and joke, riddle, not necessarily riddle, but there was a salesman that was given a new territory, and it was and I forget which area of or which country it was, but essentially he went down there and gets off the plane, and he was a shoe salesman. Looks down and he sees that nobody's wearing shoes, and he's like, I can't handle this territory. There's no market here. I can't. They don't wear shoes. So he goes back and. Then they send a second guy. Second guy gets on the phone and says, send me 50,000 pairs of shoes. Nobody wears shoes.
Right.
And so when you were saying that earlier, that just popped in my head for whatever I thought I'd share, because it is all about the perspective, how you see things. And no matter how tough the situation, you went through the '08, she went through COVID, which, you know, once in a lifetime, 100 years apart.
By the way, listeners, we are on the third once in a lifetime thing that I was supposed to. Once in a lifetime pandemic, 1 and 2 once in a lifetime economy crashes, man.
These unprecedented times.
Yeah, right.
I do have, I have empathy, and I also, you know, when I look at society as a whole, I also see where society pressures kids of a certain age to get right out of high school and jump into college, and there's this, and these brains aren't fully developed. They don't know what they're doing. The risks are high. Never in the history has there been such high risk as far as cost goes. Like, I'm going to go here, and I don't know what I'm going to do. And you feel that pressure, even if you have the means to pay for it. I was talking to a young girl one time, a Gen Z. She was 20, and her dad had the funds to send her anywhere she wanted to go. So she was coming from some privilege, but she couldn't make a decision. She says, I don't want to waste my parents' money, because it's so much money. I don't want to be them to be disappointed in me. So there's just still that pressure of making that decision. So I think as a society, we need to rethink what that pressure looks like for Gen Z. I'm a big fan of the gap year. I'm a big fan of gap 5 years. Like, take time.
Gap career.
Right.
Exactly. Let's change that. We, as a society, need to hit the pause button when it comes to pressure and say, hey, let's go explore and spend some time getting to know yourself, and spend some time doing that, instead of having this pressure that is built up then. But that's just my thoughts. I want to hear what Becky has to say.
Well, my thoughts are in line with what you're sharing. Actually, with what both of you have shared around experimenting and giving yourself time and space to get into the direct experience with something. So if it's a particular career or an education. It's this difference between attempting to figure your life out, which is a very cognitive process, versus working your life out or experimenting, actually getting in action and doing that. And so that's one of my big things with, how do I know which career? You don't know which career. And what you can do is start putting yourself in environments where you will get some sort of direct experience with this thing that you're considering, so that you at least get enough information to tell you whether it's worth continuing or not. And discover some things that you don't like. I actually think that's really important. Part of the process is getting really clear on what your career path is not. Who don't you want to work with? What types of scenarios do you not want to be in? So that's the other side of sorting out what it is that you want to do in life. But I think, and Elon,
Leon.
sorry, Leon.
Same letters.
Rocket scientist.
Different four-letter rocket scientist.
It is forever a battle in my mind when I am speaking with you. I'm like, which one is it? So, Leon, you had mentioned purpose, and that is significant to the human being, in that human beings are made for meaning. And it was Viktor Frankl who really pioneered a lot of work in this area. He said, that if a person's pursuit of purpose, or discovering the meaning in their life, if that gets thwarted, then the human being is left with three paths. They're either going to go down the path of pleasure, which is addiction. They're going to go down the path of power, which is abuse and domination, or they're going to go down the path of despair, which ultimately is ending one's life in some form or fashion. And so when the motivation for purpose gets thwarted, then we have these three options. And I have not yet come across a scenario where that hasn't held true. If you look at these cases of people that are, steeped in addiction, if you begin to unwind and unpack that, and it's complicated, so I'm not saying there's only this one issue involved, but there is going to be an issue of losing one's way in terms of what is meaningful and what is purposeful in their life.
I think that was those are great thoughts. Let's move on to our last one. So we have a second
Can
question.
I say one thing?
Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to share, because now I'm ready to share.
Okay.
Something about what all of you are saying. The societal pressures are super important to be aware of, because as I look back, I think I chose to go to New York for school because I knew that all my friends in Texas were going to get married young and have kids young. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I knew I didn't want that. And so I knew I wanted to keep exploring. And then what you said about nothing's ever perfect, it's never going to be right, so just like throw something out there and see what happens. I can map that directly over my new love of pottery. And I will create something, and there's a process. It has to go through the bisque in the kiln, which is like a half bake. I've created something, I put it through that. I have no idea if I put any like underglaze under what it's going to look like when it comes out. And then you do some more designing, and then you put it in the main kiln and fire it at 1,000 degrees. And then when it comes out, you see what it is and what your creation is. And it's such a long process. Like one mug took me at least 20 hours to make and refine. And by the way, I didn't know what the end result is going to be the entire time. Yep. And it was so exciting for me to go back and check on it and go back and see the process. And not only that, the process of just having that mindfulness of just focusing on making something, even if it's crap. It's just such an interesting experience to map over, like throw it out there, see what happens. It just might work out.
The creation thing.
And I am proud of something I created, a cheese board with a little mouse.
I love that.
All right.
It that is a solid point. I always think about, the decisions they're trying to make 19, 20, 21, you're spending all this money on this potential, if you're going down the college track, potential career. And the truth of the matter is, the numbers say that it's likely not going to be the career you're going to end up at. I mean, the way it was when you got that one job that had a pension, you stay at that job forever, that became part of your identity. That was years and years and years ago. Now you change jobs 12 to 15 times throughout your life, so you don't ever know what that path's going to look like, and that's okay. One of the things that you taught me, or you said at one point, one of our sessions, life is like a movie. If you already know what the end looks like, then it's not exciting.
Yeah, why watch
But
it?
it's like if it's that one that's always turning, twisting and turning, and it keeps you like engaged into your seat, that's what life should be like. And so, it's that getting started and then pivoting. What I'm doing today is not what I did when I was 20, but I am using experiences from almost everything I've done, and it informs me of what I'm doing now, and I can look back and say, oh, I did this before. I'm gonna do this today, and I'm gonna do it this way because I've got experiences. And so, looking at life as this journey, that is a word that's always used, but really is a journey. And you're just kind of like trying to make that decision on which path do I go, and how do I take this gear that I've learned to do things with. So anyway, those are my 2 cents to add on to what you guys are saying. All right, last one. We got Neelesh again.
So what does having a successful life mean to you?
I'd consider having a successful life as, having a stable household, right? So like having a house, not being in any financial troubles. I think being financially stable, but also being happy at the same time. I think that's what success is to me. I don't really want to be a millionaire or a billionaire. That's not really my goal. I just want to, be happy, be financially stable, but then also be a good person and, give back whenever I can.
And what is happiness to you?
To me, happiness is, the freedom to do what I want to do, right? And the freedom to help and care about the people I want to care about.
I can directly relate to that moment as well, not with learning, but with having a conversation with my mom about having kids. I'm 34, so my time isn't forever, right? And I spoke with my mom, and she said, if you don't have kids, that's okay. And I was like, you really mean that? Like, I'm not going to disappoint you that I won't give you a grandkid? She's like, no, it's your life. You do you. And I thought that was so amazing because it released a pressure from me, like, must give kids to my parents, that now I can,
Be you.
Be me, have a kid if I want to, when I want to, if I want to. And I'm doing it for myself, not for my parents. And so that's really cool that he learned that at 16.
Yeah. He's very impressive as far as how much he's put into it. So that's really interesting. Leon, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, and I think this comes back to some of the earlier themes we touched upon, right? Looking for meaning in your life is really hard. I spend far too much time thinking about 16th century blacksmiths. Right?
What?
Yeah, well, hear me through.
Okay.
So if you were a 16th century blacksmith in some 200-person village in the middle of England, right, in the rural bit, your meaning was really, really clear. You made nails and you sharpened plows and all manner of other things. And if you didn't do that, that entire village would die. Because now the farmers couldn't farm, you couldn't change the horseshoes, the horses wouldn't work. Like, in a small community, you all rely incredibly on each other. And whether or not you like the blacksmith was irrelevant. You needed them, right? You couldn't be mean to them or whatever. Like, and they were training the blacksmith was training their son to be a blacksmith, and so on and so on. Because if they died suddenly, someone had to make horseshoes, or the whole thing fell over, right? Versus today, where do you find that meaning? We don't have that kind of interconnected dependence on each other anymore, right? I mean, we do in a sense, in a greater societal, more abstract sense, but we don't have that personally. And sometimes there's a bit of parental meaning. My parents want me to do this, I'm going to do it. But ultimately, the best kind of meaning is the self-actualized meaning, right? That's the highest sort of the top of the needs triangle. I mean, you know more about this than me, but and it's the hardest question to answer for Gen Z, and it's the only meaning they're probably going to find, because we don't, like I said, there's no more need for blacksmiths, right? Except for Ren fairs, but it's a niche career, right? And so we gave them the very hardest question and said, and if you can't figure this out when you're 16, then you're screwed. right? And that's hey, figure out the top of the needs triangle, the highest, most complicated level of self-actualization. Figure that out before you're 18 so you can pick a career for the rest of your life. And strangely, they're struggling. While most of us as adults have never even figured that out. Some adults haven't even started. Boomers, are horrendous at this because they never had to answer that question. They didn't need to. Their society really needed them to go do these things. And that's not a criticism of either side. But man, you're just like, you're 18, figure out the meaning of life, go, and then pick a degree that apparently encapsulates that. Like, come on, just setting them up for failure at that point.
What I found in my previous career in financial wealth management, in dealing with hundreds of families, is I found a mismatch between the expertise of parents and what they were good at. So they picked one or two careers or whatever path they were in. And their 3 or 4 kids, what they wanted to do. It was never, I want to be that blacksmith, mom and dad, show me how. It's always, I want to go do this, I want to go do that. And there's this disconnect where the parents don't have the tools. They're like, I don't know, I don't know how to tell you, go to college and figure it out. And so that's been kind of this thing that I've seen hundreds of times. And so, but trying to figure it all out, parents don't have the answers. And as a parent of a Gen Z person myself, is you want to give the cheat codes, but you're going to give the cheat codes to your life and your path. And that's going to be different than
what they want.
What they're going to go through. And so it is the parents' job to continue to grow along with their kids. And so that's what I've learned as a parent. But I want to hear what you have to say.
So the thing that stood out to me about this last clip, he didn't use these words per se, but I think this is what he was getting at. He was getting at identifying his own values, which he may have some overlap with his parents' values, but it sounds like he's in this process where he's starting to clarify for himself what matters. And that's really important, because as long as I'm living my life based off of someone else's values, then that's a recipe for destruction, and I'm eventually going to be miserable, and because they're not really mine anyway. But if I do the work to identify what's important to me right now, what's important to me long term, like are there any values that I have right now that are going to make a long-term impact, but then also knowing that there might be things that I value today that serve no purpose 10 years from now. And so my willingness to alternate and shift when necessary, use what serves me and discard what doesn't. Like I love, since you're such a rocket scientist, I love the fundamental functioning of the rocket, where the engine that propels the rocket off the ground eventually burns out. Now it's just dead weight. So what do we do with it?
Throw it in the ocean.
We throw it in the ocean, yes, which is another whole set of issues. But the principle being that when something that was useful to bring me here, when I can see that it not only has no capacity to take me where I want to go, but may actually hinder me from where I want to go, will I be willing to release that?
Yeah.
So that I can take on, something else. And I think if someone who is in this season of life where they are identifying what's important to them, try it on. Yeah. You're not getting married to this thing or committed for the next 10 years. Try it on and actually experiment with it. And if it seems like, that's something that actually brings a lot of benefit to you, well, that may very well then be one of your values, your core values.
Yeah, I think that both parents and kids both parents and Gen Z needs to hear that message, because you also have the parents that are the bottom part of that rocket that are just hanging on, and they're called helicopter parents. They're like, no, we don't want to let go. We want to make these decisions for you.
You need me. You need me.
And the funny thing about that rocket is if you didn't let go, it would never get there.
Yeah.
You have. Wow. That's the only way for a rocket to get to space is to drop chunks of it off. And reland them don't. That's up to you, right? But if you didn't do that, if you didn't let go of the things that weren't useful useful on the ground, not useful up here, if you didn't do that, you would never get to orbit. It would never make it.
Yeah, it would actually
That's
prevent
so
you.
It would hold you back. It would prevent you. It is impossible to get to orbit like that as a single rocket.
And I think with that comment,
Mic drop.
Mic drop. That's the end of our first recording. I really want to thank the audience for listening and thank Becky and you guys for being here. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you. Thanks, Becky.
Super fun.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, Dr. Vanstone, literally giving rocket scientist. Thanks so much to all the contributors this episode. From the Gen Z segment, Lauren, Neelesh, and Lola. Interviews by the amazing Anaïs Schmidt. And from the mentor segment, Becky Henderson. This podcast is hosted by Dan Dillard, Dr. Leon Vanstone, and myself, Natalie Payton. This is a Founding Up podcast. Find us wherever you're listening now.